Good morning. I'll call the Kaneohe County Board of Commissioners meeting to order. We'll start the meeting with a pledge. I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you and welcome everyone. For those who are listening, we have quite a few people in the audience because we have quite a few bid openings and lettings today. So we'll start the meeting with the consent agenda. And the items that are on the consent agenda, I'll read them. It's approval of the county board meetings, kind of these are mostly routine type of functions. Approval of the county board minutes and legal and ICOMPAS, from legal and ICOMPAS from March 7th. Approval of the auditor's warrants and claims, that's the bill pay. Approval of the human services warrants and claims, more bill pay. Cancellation of human service warrants, those are checks that either were made out by mistake or aren't needed anyway. And then the renewal of licenses, which is again fairly routine. So these are on a consent agenda. What a consent agenda is, we make one motion to approve these fairly routine actions. We have the option to pull any item from the consent agenda. Do any of the commissioners wish to pull anything from the consent? With that, I will entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Mr. Chair, I'll make a motion to approve the items on the consent agenda.
Commissioner Dwayne Anderson moves on the consent agenda. Do I hear a second?
I'll second.
Commissioner Gardner seconds. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. All right, so we'll get to our first bid letting. It is for the sanitary sewer manhole repair. Mel Odens will be presenting
Mr.
that.
Chair, members of the board, this is a bid letting for the sanitary sewer manhole repair, North Shore Drive. We will be opening them in alphabetical order, and we will not be recommending award today. We will actually take this through the Glacial Lakes Commission on probably the 27th, and then consider at a future county board meeting for approval or award. Okay.
Thank you.
So the first bid is from Crow River Construction, New London. The base bid is $204,000 even, 204,000.00. And the add alternate to that is $12,500 even, 12500.00. The next bid is Dunick Incorporated of Princeburg. Their base bid is $255,765 and no cents. 255,765.00. And the add alternate is $11,500 and no cents. 11500.00. The next one is Geislinger and Sons out of Watkins, Minnesota. Their base bid is $232,456 and no cents. 232,456 11,000.00. And the ad alternate is 11,000 even, 11,000. The next one is Landwehr Construction out of St. Cloud. Their base bid is $218,489 and no cents. 218,489.00. And the ad alternate is $1. One. This is the last one. Yep. And the last bid is Northdale Construction out of Albertville, Minnesota. And their base bid is $299,063.52. 299,063.52. And their ad alternate is $11,193 and no cents. 11,193.00. Mr. Chair, that concludes the bids, and once again, we will be taking these through the Glacial Lakes Commission at their next meeting for consideration, and then take back to the county board for award at a future date.
Thank you, Mr. Odens, and I'd also like to thank all the contractors that entered a bid. Appreciate your interest in Kaneohe County, so thank you. All right, next on the agenda is a County Road Safety Plan update from Renee Kuehl of SRF Consulting. I hope I'm pronouncing that reasonably close.
Yeah, pretty close. Thank you.
But you'll correct me, right? And say who you are and who you're from, so those watching and for the record.
Yes. Yes, I'm Renee Keel from SRF Consulting Group. I'm here, I was hired by Mel Odens to help with the County Road Safety Plan for Kaneohe County. Do you guys have slides in front of you, or how do I need to do this, Mel?
They have it on their iCompass, and I'll make
you
sure
have it?
it's on the computers.
Okay.
Oh, do you have that?
Yeah, that way the public gets it.
It's just,
15 minutes, that would work.
Here. All right, so thank you for your time today. I've been working with Mel and his team for the last year or so to work on a county road safety plan for the county. And our goal here is to try to help with making your roads safer and giving you ideas of safety improvements that you can make to make the road safer for your residents. So today I want to talk about what a safety plan is, why it's important to address safety. We're going to go over some of the crash data for your county. We're going to talk about the process we used, and then we're going to talk about some of the recommendations that we came up with. So what is a county road safety plan? This is a systemic approach to looking at data to identify locations in your network that are of concern. We've been doing these plans since 2008. Kaneohe County had a plan originally. We're doing an update now. And this update will help give you new ideas of different safety projects that you can implement on your roadways. So why is there a need for these plans? Over 60% of severe crashes, which mean fatalities or serious life-changing injuries, occur on local roadways, and the most severe are on county roads. And local agencies are responsible for more than 90% of roadways in Minnesota. So the locations where these severe crashes are happening are on these local roads, specifically the counties. Here's just some data that talks about some of the statistics for fatalities and such. In 2001, almost 500 people were killed on our roads in Minnesota. Over 17,000 were injured. And so this is really just helping understand the gravity of the issue here. and why it's important to focus on this. When we look at crash data statewide, this is a breakdown of fatal and serious injury crashes. A lot of times it's assumed that these crashes are happening on the state highways or the freeways, because that's where there's a lot of vehicles and fast speeds. And 30% of them are happening on trunk highways, but 39% are happening on county roads. And so this is why we're here to focus on your roadways. This is just another way to look at some of that data. So this is looking at fatalities over time. And this is breaking it down between statewide, trunk highway, and county system. You can see that the green line is the county system, showing that the fatality rates on the county roads are higher. We have been working as a state for many years to try to bring fatalities down, and we've been making good progress. But you can see in the last few years here, there's been a spike again. Over COVID, we've seen a lot of speeding issues, and so we're trying to figure out how we can make that trend go back down again. This is a really interesting graph that, if you're familiar with the Towards Zero Deaths program, started 20 years ago here in the state to try to bring all the different E's together to figure out how to reduce fatalities on our roadways. And that happened in 2003 was the start of that program. And at that time, we had about 650 people dying on our roads every year. Since then, you can see the trend has gone down. We've been down to 350. We're back up in the 400s again. But this is really just to show if we had done nothing, the trend would have continued up in that 600 to 700 people dying every year. And we feel from the work that's been done from various areas, especially with the counties making improvements, we've saved over 4,000 lives in Minnesota over the last 20 years. So we have been working on updating plans for the last few years. We worked in phase 1, we had 14 counties we worked with. And now we're in phase 2, working with 17 different counties. So you're one of the 17 that we're working with now. We're actually hoping to be working with another group here in phase 3 shortly. And our plan is to hopefully update all plans for the whole state. Okay, so I know this graph is a little hard to read, but what we're trying to show here is when we look at statewide crashes, we're trying to show just kind of what I was showing you, how the breakdown of where these severe crashes are happening. And we use this kind of decision tree process where we start at the top with all the crashes and we break it down to see how many crashes on the state system, how many on the local roads. And then from there, how many on the county versus city. Then when you get down to the county level, where are rural versus urban. And the real takeaway here is that, and the trend across the state is that a lot of the crashes are happening on the rural system, specifically on segments where we have run off the road crashes, particularly on curves. And then also intersection-related crashes where we have severe T-bone type crashes. Those are the most severe crashes that we're trying to mitigate. For Kandiyohi County, you used to have the same trend. 68% of your crashes or your severe crashes are happening on rural roads. That's why we're going to be focusing on improvements for your rural network. This is a slightly different way of looking at Kandiyohi County's data. So we're trying to look at emphasis areas. So when a crash occurs, all this data is recorded about it. So was there speeding involved? Was it a lane departure crash? Was it intersection related? What type of driver was involved? And so this is just to show that the biggest emphasis areas to focus on for Kandiyohi County are intersection crashes, lane departure crashes, and then other things to make sure you're aware of is older drivers, motorcycle, and younger drivers are actually the other 3 areas that stand out with crashes over the last 5-year range. So now that we understand the problem, we'll talk about the process we use to mitigate some of this. So we use a systemic process that is data-driven. It's a national recognized process where we look for risk and we identify locations that are at risk, and we identify strategies that you can consider at those locations. Even though a crash may not have occurred there yet, we know from data based on similar locations that might be down the road, if a crash has happened at a similar location nearby, there's a very high likely chance that a crash could happen at a different location that hasn't had a crash yet. So we're trying to be proactive, we're trying to think ahead and predict where crashes could happen so we could put improvements in place before something happens. So we've been doing this process for over 15 years, And the goal is to come up with lists of projects you can implement and then apply for HSIP funding. So you'll get safety funding to implement these things. MnDOT has dedicated a large amount of their HSIP funding to the counties. They actually break it up based on where the fatalities are happening, the severe crashes. So, you know, the networks that have more problems get more money, and they have that money available to help with improvements. And over the course of this program, you know, they put over $300 million into the county roads to help with safety. So my next few slides here are just to talk about what the risk factors are. So we've taken your roadway network and we've broken it into segments and intersections and curves. And we treat each of those differently because there's different safety strategies you would apply to each of those. So segments, from data that we've looked at where crashes are happening and severe crashes, we know that if there's a certain speed limit of like over 55 miles an hour, certain traffic volumes, sections of roadway that have a lot of access points, like field access points or driveways and that sort of thing, or locations that have a lot of curves. We know that these roads are roads that are more at risk than a road that's straight, that doesn't have any access points, doesn't have any curves. And so when we look at these factors and locations that have these factors, we use a star ranking system. So if one of these is present, we give that section a star. In the end, a location that has more stars is more at risk. So that's kind of the process we use. Same for curves. We look at a certain radius of a curve. We look at traffic volumes, lane width, what kind of shoulder you have, if a shoulder exists or not. There's a phenomenon called the visual trap, and maybe you are familiar with this if you're driving down a road and the road actually curves to the left, but there's like a tree line that continues straight. People might think the road goes straight. So things like that. We look for those type of things to figure out if there is risk at these curves. And then same thing for intersections. So for intersections, we're looking for locations that the intersection might be at a skew, so you have sightline issues. If there's a weird leg configuration, maybe you have a fifth leg or something, we look at traffic volumes. We look at if it's near a curve, because that could be sightline issues, if there's a railroad crossing nearby, or if there's commercial developments nearby. These are all different things that we look at to determine if an intersection is at risk. So from all of that process, we have gone through all of your segments and intersections and curves. We've applied all the star ranking system. And from there, we identify areas that we think are high risk. And so you can see here, this is showing two tables for rural and urban segments. So the total here is showing that we've broken your network up into 143 different rural segments. And of those, the ones in the red box here are the ones that we have identified as high priority. So I think that's about 65. So about over half of your network we've identified as high priority. And those are locations that we would then suggest a specific project. Same thing for curves. We've identified almost 300 curves on your network. And of those, we have about 70 curves that we would identify as high risk. And then of intersections, so we looked at intersections where county roads intersected with state highways or other county roads or other CASA roads. We did not look at local roads down to the local level or township level, just because that just gets to be a lot of intersections to look at, and that's usually not where a lot of the severe crashes are happening. They're happening on the higher speed roadways. And so we looked at about 230 of your intersections, and I would say we have about 80 intersections that we identified as high priority. And then this is urban intersections. So there's about 25 urban intersections that we identified. And there's a few different projects we suggested for some of your urban locations. This is a map that shows the high priority locations. So just at a high level, anything that's kind of in the orangey yellow colors, those are the locations that are considered high risk. When you get down to the blues and purples, those are the lowest risk locations. And so this is really what helped us identify your high risk and where to suggest safety projects. So from there, we're at the point where we have to identify safety strategies to suggest at these locations. We use national research that's been done to show proven effective strategies, and that's what MnDOT uses to identify which type of strategies to suggest at each location. And so from that process, we have these decision trees that we've developed that help us take a location that's at risk, and then we look at the characteristics of the roadway, and it helps us get to a point where we can say, okay, this is a good spot for rumble strips, this is a good spot for a painted edge line. It has to do with things like ADT and such, and we use a decision tree so that we have a systemic process that is the same. So, if you have a road that has a certain ADT, you're gonna have the same type of safety strategy on that road as the road, a couple miles away. So there's familiarity with your residents driving the roads, and they're not surprised to see different treatments on different roads. So you can see here for our segment analysis, this is a summary of the types of projects that we are recommending. So we have like 6-inch wet reflective in the groove paint at 3 different segments on your roadway. We have centerline rumble strips at 17 different locations. We have edgeline rumble strips at 33, and then a shoulder rumble strip at 1. The difference between those is edgeline is where the rumble is like really close to the painted edge, and then the shoulder is a little bit further away from the edge, and it's purely based on how much paved shoulder you have available to build that rumble in. And then 62 locations where we're suggesting an enhanced edgeline, which means rather than the 4-inch typical with painted edgeline, we might suggest a 6-inch edgeline. So it's a little bit wider, a little bit brighter, and more apparent for drivers. For urban segments, we just had one project where we suggested a vehicle speed feedback sign. And then for curves, the various strategies we have is one location where we would recommend you look at your clear zone, which means the space on the edge of the road where there might be trees and that sort of thing that are dangerous for vehicles. We suggest 17 locations with curve warning signs, which is just the sign ahead telling people that there's a curve coming up and that you should be aware that it's coming. And then chevrons. I know there are some chevrons on your roadways, but chevrons are really one of the most effective strategies, especially when we have cars going off the roads on curves. It's very inexpensive and very effective. So we would suggest 23 locations to consider chevrons, and then speed advisory signs. So that's just a sign to let drivers know that they're approaching a curve and they should slow down, and it gives them a different speed for that curve. So there's 5 locations we suggest that. And then rural intersections, there's one location we suggest a J-turn, which is at an intersection with a state highway. So that would be something to coordinate with MnDOT if interested. And if you're not familiar with a J-turn, that's where you're smiling.
We're painfully familiar with J-turns.
Okay, okay, I'll let that one go. But we do have one location we suggest J-turns. 15 locations with street lighting, so just to illuminate the intersections. This helps in rural environments, not only for awareness at night, but when you have roads where people have been driving for a long time, they might not be aware, they might not be paying attention, there's an intersection ahead. That street pole as a visual actually helps identify where an intersection is during daylight conditions. LED stop signs at 10 locations, conversion to an all-way stop at 1 location, transverse rumble strips at an intersection at 14 locations, and then we have quite a few locations that we suggest to review the signs and markings at these intersections. And that's just to look at things like, is the sign meeting retroreflectivity requirements? Is it big enough? What's the placement of that? Is the stop bar still visible? So things like that to review. And then the last is some urban intersections. We have 3 locations to suggest confirmation lights. So that's where, for red light running, where you can have the blue lights on the camera for law enforcement, so they can have the ability to see when drivers are running a red light and be parked downstream. They can look back at the signal and see these blue lights that help them see if the light was red when someone drove through the intersection. 2 locations to upgrade signal hardware, and then 6 locations to upgrade signs and markings. And then one last one. These are pedestrian and bike-related safety projects. So in your more urban areas, we suggested some locations to do some median refuge islands for pedestrians when crossing the road. They have a space to stop in if they can't make it all the way across. 11 locations with curb extensions. That helps just make that crossing distance a little bit shorter for pedestrians. Pedestrian countdown timers at a few signals. And then some signal changing. So there's a thing called a leading pedestrian interval. So if your signal, when your signal phasing is changing, it'll change to all red for just a few seconds, and the pedestrian signal will go first. And so it gives the pedestrians about 3 or 4 seconds just to start their crossing before cars are moving. So a few locations for that. And then a couple locations just to upgrade signal hardware and revise signal timing. All right. So that was a lot on safety projects. I'll maybe pause there and see if you have questions before we talk about the HSIP funding program.
Thank you, Ms. Keel. I wrote several questions down as you were presenting, and I ended up crossing most of them off because your presentation answered them as you went through them. And I just want to clear up something.
Sure.
Our reaction to the J-turn does not reflect our opposition to it necessarily, but opposition to one specific J-turn that was being proposed.
Okay.
And has been talked about a lot. So as I say, we're very aware of J-turns.
Okay.
We have one right out here.
Good. All right. I mean, they are effective. I know they can be controversial, but man, getting rid of the cross traffic crashes just makes a huge difference.
Agree. Any questions for Ms. Keel? Commissioner Gardner?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Renee, I'm a little surprised that so many of the high impact crashes and severe crashes, including deaths, occur on county roads. But in a way, I shouldn't be surprised because don't we have a lot more road mileage total
Yes.
than the rest of the system?
Yes.
And then to follow that up, do we see as much traffic on that system as the rest of the system does? Or I guess I'm just trying to figure out with this road miles driven
Yeah, million miles.
versus the rest of the system.
Right.
If we've got all these roads, but we have not as much traffic, it seems a little counterintuitive to me that we would have a majority of the high impact crashes.
Yeah, I see your point, because it's more about exposure, right? You're thinking the more miles you travel, the more opportunities you have to have crashes. What we're seeing is that when you're on a state highway where you have a lot more miles driven, more vehicles going, the roads are straight. There are not a lot of conflicts. You have, it's a freeway with ramps and such. So there's not as much opportunity to have the type of crashes that are severe, running off the road and intersection crashes. And so it's really these 2-lane highways that have minimal shoulders where if someone makes a mistake, if they're not paying attention for a second, or they fall asleep, or they're just not anticipating that curve, their wheels get off onto that shoulder, they maybe hit some gravel, and they're off the road in the ditch. And that's really what the problem is. It's not as much about exposure and number of miles, it's just about the type of roadway and, the challenges, I guess, with the 2-lane highways.
So what I think I'm hearing you say is that it's really imperative for drivers to pay more attention than they might on a state highway, because like you said, it's straight and you just kind of go,
Right.
as opposed to some of our county roads because, we've got a lot more obstacles to go around.
That's right.
Okay, thank you.
And having things on the shoulder like rumbles they're just that one extra piece that helps, bring their attention if they do make a mistake and they start drifting. It's that one thing that, gets them back on the road. So.
And I do see in our 2023 program that we've got about 44 miles of that HSIP grooving planned, and maybe Mel wants to comment on that.
Well, Mr. Chair, that's been a priority for us is this edge line, because I know it in case of counties that's been pretty effective. And also with the wet reflective, it's more effective than it probably perhaps was even 10 years ago, wouldn't you say, Renee, with its wet reflective versus just a grooved in normal wider edge line?
Right.
We went wider at first with just the epoxy, and now we groove it in with a porcelain, and so it's a wet reflective, so it almost glows when it's raining.
Yeah.
Other questions?
Yes,
Commissioner
just
Berg.
a quick follow-up. Commissioner Gardner commented about the miles. The trunk highways you're talking about, approximately how many miles is that? Do you have any idea?
Question for this guy, Mark.
Because we kind of know what the county numbers are right now.
Everybody, I'm first of all Mark Wagner with the Mendota Office of Traffic Engineering. I'm here with Renee to help with the presentation. I think off the top of my head, there's about 13 or 14,000 miles of trunk highways in the state, and I believe I want to say it's like 3 times that number. Do you have the numbers?
I've got the number for Ganduat
Mine
County.
is loading.
If you want to take us to home here, we got 161 miles of trunk highway in this county, and we have 650 of county roads. So that's where we are.
And I think statewide it's about 144,000 total system miles, and the counties have somewhere in the 80 to 90,000 range. And trunk highways are a lower number, like 10 or 20,000.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Chair, may I follow up too?
Yes.
On the one chart you had, it showed that all the progress has been making over the several years, but in 2020, all of a sudden there was a big jump. Everything's tied in with COVID nowadays. This can't possibly be tied in with COVID at all. Or
Speed.
do you have an explanation for that, I guess?
Speeding.
I wish we had a great explanation for it. There's a few ideas out there that some of this was tied to COVID and the way that traffic volumes changed, especially the fact that those peaks that happened during commutes kind of went away. And sometimes that congestion actually is a safety factor. It requires you to slow down or pay attention a little more. So that's one thought. There's some ideas out there about people just needing to get out of the house and spending more time on the roads. So I think that there is some relation to COVID as far as the spike in fatalities, but exactly what that was, I don't think that there's a firm answer on that one yet.
I know there was a report at one time about the increase of speeding,
Yes.
hyper speeding, not just 10
Yep.
miles over the limit, but a lot over the limit. But
Yes. So we have seen that. MnDOT, someone else in my Office of Traffic Engineering did a study in a Maple Grove work zone on I-94, and the number of speeders going over 90, even through the work zone, I think went from like 0.5% to 1%, which doesn't sound like a lot, but if 1% of your speeders are going that fast, that's a really dangerous situation. So yes, you're right, that speeding, definitely we saw peaks in speeding, and those hyper speeders were more common.
Commissioner Anderson.
Yep, thanks, Mr. Chair. So maybe I missed it on here. Were there any statistics that showed like what people were doing when they got in the accident, like distracted drivers, or were they on their phone? And then my question would be kind of a follow-up on that would be how is it best to prevent that? Because we had several accidents last year that were fatalities, and at least one of those was a distracted driver. One was a stolen vehicle type situation, but we're trying to come up with a plan to kind of prevent those. They're kind of high accident intersections anyway, but if you have a distracted driver, how do you wake them up so that they know there's a stop, ahead? So.
If you can answer that question, you can have my job, first of all. One of the things you can see on the slide on the screen is that that red box accidentally crossed through inattentive, the risk factor. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
We did account for that. It's also kind of a tough thing to look at sometimes just because you kind of run into a dead men tell no tales type of thing. How distracted were they right before? You got to get into like cell phone data at that point, and we don't always have access to that when we're looking at these crashes. But from officer narratives and the way the crash happened and the other people involved, we can usually get a pretty good idea.
Okay.
We have a good percentage here on screen, but we don't know exactly how many of those crashes or which exact ones might have been.
Yeah, because I talked to a commissioner from another county, and they had put in the lighted stop signs at all their county intersections that they could, And he said, but people still blow those signs. So he was frustrated because they put a lot of money and effort into it. And I'm sure it helped, but
Yes.
but at the same time, he said they're still blowing those signs and they didn't know why. And I'm wondering if it was because of distracted drivers in a rural area. They're probably on their phone. And
Could be
that's
distraction.
my guess. But
Yeah, could be inattention. One of the things we look at too is how far since the last stop sign did you drive? So we've seen that if it's more than 5 miles between stop signs, sometimes you can kind of get into that road hypnosis
Okay.
in a way. So then, you're not paying as close attention to when the next stop sign is coming. And then, yeah, that might be a case where they're not even looking at their phone. They might just not see the stop sign on the road.
thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions at this point? I had the same question about the distracted driving and had it been measured, but if you go back to one of the early slides when you were gathering data about intersections, do you take into account anecdotal data? So I'm thinking of an intersection that has several accidents that have been witnessed. None of them have been severe, at least in the last few years, but a lot of near misses and close calls. Does that play into your analysis in any way?
Yeah, go ahead.
Since this is a data-driven process, we try to stick to data. So near misses and that sort of thing is good information for us to understand, but we don't use it as a risk factor because we don't have that data for every location. And so we're trying to really stick with this data-driven proven process that looks at risk factors. And we do listen, like when Mel would give us information about locations that are you're experiencing, that you're having near misses, or your law enforcement is seeing skid marks, or they're just seeing more activity. We are including that as kind of a separate section in your report with some information about locations that from your experience and your observations are high priority based on your experiences, and we are including that as well. So it's kind of like two separate sections of our report. This is our data-driven process, and then we are going to have another section that lists some of the locations that Mel and Jeremy have helped with us.
Because a common comment that we hear is that you have to wait for an accident or somebody to be killed before we do something about an intersection, and
Yeah. Yep, and that's what we're trying. We're trying to get around that with this process, seeing if we can try to build some improvements before things happen.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Yeah. Just another follow, maybe more of a comment this time, but you're talking about safety strategies, and all of these, we're kind of used to dealing with this. Mr. Odens does such a good job at this point, up to this point, of addressing a lot of issues like this. So the fixes are not uncommon for us, but what you're saying and working with Public Works as well, that we need to do more and more specific, am I?
Yeah, this is good for the planning efforts. I think what we've talked about, we've debated this many times with this team. What we observe, when we went through the process with the EMS people, the sheriff's department, the maintenance department, the engineering department, independently, and what I'm hearing from, I think, all of you, there's a lot of, they don't do brake light surveys, near misses. They don't do that because you don't have that at everything. But those are the ones that we've been kind of chasing right now a little bit, because we got certain routes that are just a lot of blow the stop signs.
So I think I heard when you said, I'll pause here. Does that mean you have more to present, or?
Mark just has a few slides. He wants to talk about the
All right.
HSIP funding.
Thank you.
Yep.
Please proceed.
All right, so what everyone's here for, the money portion of the presentation. So HSIP is, as you can see, the Highway Safety Improvement Program. It's a federal program. So there's a list on the screen. And what this safety plan basically does is it gives you like a packet almost of project sheets to submit for HSIP funding as part of the application. And what that does is it shows, because HSIP is a program that is basically dedicated funds to reduce fatal and serious injury crashes on roads. So what that sheet from this report tells us is that basically, like, this project has gone through that systemic safety planning process, so it fits the criteria, the federal criteria for the HSIP program. So it's a lot easier for us to look at that project and say, this is a great candidate for HSIP funds. And then a lot of times, if you just pull these projects sheets straight from the county safety plan, send them in with an application, especially at the high-risk locations, we're a lot more likely to approve those almost, with a cursory review, basically, because it's gone through this whole effort so far already. And then you can just see, sometimes cost per site can come into it. The lower, the better. HSIP isn't a big program. It's about $30 million, but then you think about there's 87 counties that could apply. MnDOT gets a portion of that as well for their roadways. And it's split along that kind of 40, 60, 70, 30. So the local roads will get about 60 to 70% of the funding every year. So we like the low-cost measures like rumble strips and the edgeline markings, renewing signs and markings sometimes too, because you get a big bang for your buck, basically. And then basically each project gets an objective score when it comes in. That's kind of based on the criteria you see on the screen there. And then it also goes through a committee review, which actually Mel was on this past round. It's called the subjective score. So we look at a project and we kind of, it's not really our opinion, but it's like, do we think that this is either matching the objective score it's getting, or is it being underrated for some reason, or is it even being overrated for some reason? And then, between those two scores, we kind of reward projects at the end of the day based on how everything falls after the objective and subjective scores are combined. So this pyramid kind of looks at what I was talking about with the project types. At the bottom, you have your low cost, big bang for your buck. We like to see a lot of those. And then at the top, you have your interchanges, reconstructions, other things like pedestrian hybrid beacons. Those are going to be way more expensive and usually dedicated to a single site. So we don't really get to fund, even if we wanted to, we don't get to fund all of the ones we wanted to some years at individual locations. And then this is just an overall summary of all the county HSIP projects. So as you can see, about 60 million each on segments and intersections in the last 12 or 13 years. Curves runs off the screen, but it's a few $1 million there as well. And a lot of that's because, like Renee said, chevrons are such a low cost, big bang for your buck treatment that's really what you end up doing as a first step on a lot of curves. So you're doing a lot of projects, but they might just not cost as much overall as some of these segment and intersection projects. Then this is a specific look at Candy Ojai since 2008. So you can see about $1.5 million on segments, 76,000 on intersections, and then about the same amount on curves. And with that, I guess I can take any more questions if you want to on the HSIP program. Otherwise, there's our contact information on the screen.
Any questions for Mr. Wagner? I've got a couple of questions. Sure. One is, so on the allocations from the Highway Safety Improvement Plan that goes from the federal government to the state, out to the districts, and then to the counties.
It's a fun process, isn't it? Yes.
Excuse me. Do you decide the dollars based on the accident reports and then allow the local jurisdiction to decide where and how to spend those dollars? Or do you select the project and say, this is the one we think you should spend your allocation on?
So HSIP is a pretty restrictive program. We can't really just give that money as a kind of a block grant or a block fund. Basically, these counties have to apply for specific projects, and then with a specific dollar amount. It doesn't have to be really that specific, but you know it's an $80,000 project basically. So then we review those individually in my office when we do these HSIP application reviews. And then that specific project would get awarded. It gets a state aid project number from there. So then, yeah, like once the federal funds are tied to that project, that's what that money has to be spent on.
Okay.
I hope that answered your question.
It does.
Okay.
Are there ever any discretionary funding sources available, or not sources, but discretionary funds available for a specific small project that a county may have?
I know there are other local partnership funds and other state aid funds available, but as far as safety, I can't think of any off the top of my head. A lot of them are usually federal based, or they come from the state, so they usually have a pretty specific intent, and we don't have, that I'm aware of, a lot of kind of pooled funds for counties to draw from.
And are the distribution of the HSIP dollars from MnDOT to the counties, from what you're saying, it seems conceivable that a county, if they don't put an application in, won't receive any funding.
Right, exactly. Yep. You have to apply for the funds to get the funds. So they're not just automatically distributed
Based on,
to every, no,
on population or something like that.
correct. Yeah,
or-
we have
or
about,
crashes.
yeah, exactly, exactly. We have about 85% of counties right now that apply for funds. So there's a few that just choose not to participate. I think there's some smaller outstate ones and even a couple metro ones that they just don't really apply for HSIP funds.
All right, any other questions? Well, thank you very much for the presentation and the good information, and
Thank you.
thanks for driving out.
Of course.
Let's take a 5-minute break here before we move on to the next agenda item. We'll reconvene the Kennesaw County Board of Commissioners meeting, and next up on our agenda is the bid award for the chloride application. Mr. Odens?
Mr. Chair, members of the board, Mel Odens, Public Works Director for the county. I've got 3 awards in front of you. The first one is the chloride application CA-23. For many years, the county does chloride applications, and we cover about 300 areas. We do farm sites within a couple hundred feet of a gravel, if they're on gravel roads. And then we also do all our paved road, or the gravel coming up to the paved road, the last couple hundred feet. It amounts to somewhere in the 35 to 50 mile range. Bids did come in a little bit over, but it's kind of an inflationary thing. So my recommendation is to award the bid to Crow River Construction of New London in the amount of $201,405.00.
So you heard the recommendation from Public Works Director Mel Odens. What are your wishes?
I'll move the recommendation of staff.
Commissioner Gardner moves to accept the bid of Crow River Construction. Do I hear a second?
I'll second it.
Commissioner Dale Anderson seconds. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Thank
Mr.
you.
Chair, the next one is our reflectorized pavement markings. This is what we do with our maintenance contract. If you look, we are considerably more than what our estimate was, but our estimate is slowly increasing. It still is only running about 9 cents a foot, but paint has been a very short commodity the last few years. In fact, it was such a short commodity last year that we weren't even able to get all our crosswalks painted, even with our own staff. So we feel it's 63,000 over, but we still feel that we need to get it done. So it's my recommendation to award the bid to Sir Lancelot out of Edina in the amount of $181,960. And incidentally, this we're doing the south part of the county this year. Plus, we do all of the towns. What I mean by the towns is the small towns: Spicer, New London, Greensburg, every town except Wilmer. Basically, Wilmer does their own.
So you heard the recommendation from Mr. Odens on the reflective pavement markings. What are your wishes there?
I'll make the motion that we award the bid to Sir Lancelot, and then I have a question after.
Commissioner Dwayne Anderson moves. Do I hear a second?
Mr. Chair, I'll second that motion.
Commissioner Berg seconds. And questions?
Yeah,
Mr.
so
Anderson.
is there any reason why we only had one bid, or don't you have any
Well,
explanation?
we used to get 3.
Okay,
Last year, we got 2. And if you can imagine what's going on here,
okay.
they're buying each other out. So,
Oh, okay, okay.
so Sir Lancelot just bought out AAA, I believe it was. Yes. And
like-
that also might play into this a little bit.
All right.
Just like the Swiss banks. Dwayne laughs. He's got money in the Swiss bank. All right, please proceed.
So the last one is our maintenance crack filling. We do, this year, we're doing 32 miles. This is just a routine maintenance.
I don't believe we,
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, we have a motion and a second. Thank you. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Thanks for watching my bobber.
So, Mr. Chair, the last one is crack filling, our maintenance crack filling. We did get a lot of bids on this, and it is not as bad over. It's $15,000 over. But it's my recommendation to award the contract to Northwest Asphalt out of Thief River Falls in the amount of $200,421.00.
To hear the recommendation from Mr. Odens, how do you wish to proceed with the crack filling?
Also move to let Northwest Asphalt Maintenance get.
Commissioner Dale Anderson moves. Do I hear a second?
I'll second that.
Commissioner Dwayne Anderson seconds. Any discussion? I would just comment that I don't know that I've seen the spring freeze-thaw cycle and the deterioration of the roads any worse than I've seen it this year. It's
But this
pretty
year has been
remarkable.
really bad. Yeah, you're gonna probably, we do start cold patching as soon as we can. But yeah, this has just gotta be done again this year.
All right, before I forget to vote, any further discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Thank you.
So, Mr. Chair, the only thing I do want to point out is that those three maintenance contracts are about 91,000 over, which, when you put it into perspective of our $17 million of work we're doing this year, they're over by large percents, but not large dollars, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's not something we haven't heard before in the last 18 months, whether it's for county work or in our personal lives with gas and food and everything else. So,
Yeah, and the striping contract, we just heard the safety plan about, edge line striping and center line striping is important for visibility and safety. So to me, I feel comfortable with them. So,
very good. Thank you. All right. Mr. Gear.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just here this morning to present to you the continuation or the tabled item of selling of the surplus land, the recycling center building. We opened bids on March 7th here before the board, and upon review of that bid over the past 2 weeks with Administrator Baker and myself, we are recommending that you not accept that bid and that you approve advertising for bids one more time. And that would be our recommendation. The advertisement would run the 25th, the 1st and the 8th of April, and then we would open bids again on April 18th. Have had several other communication with potential bidders since the closing, and so looking favorable to receive some more bids. So that is kind of a synopsis of what we're representing this morning.
So you heard the recommendation from Mr. Gear regarding the bid that we received on the recycling center. How do you wish to proceed? Go ahead, Mr. Gardner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will move the recommendation of staff to reject the bid.
We have a motion to reject the bid upon recommendation of the staff. Do I hear a second?
Commissioner, Mr. Chair, I'll second that motion.
Commissioner Berg seconds. Any discussion? Mr. Gardner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Gary, just refresh us and for the public. We have a property where we received a bid that was about 20 cents on the dollar, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
And the gap is quite substantial, so I can't see us disposing of a county asset at that level. I don't think that's what the taxpayers would expect of us, and hopefully we'll come back with something different. Otherwise, maybe we need to go back and take a look at reuse of that building internally.
Right. Understand your
Mr.
comments.
Did you want to respond to that?
No, I
before
just said
turn-
I understand his comments or
Okay.
concerns, yes.
Commissioner Berg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you just share for the audience what the bid was and like how many square feet, just to kind of go over?
Correct, yes. The bid that was received was $90,000, and it's a 25,000 square foot building. So obviously, as Commissioner Gardner mentioned, it's a significant reduction from, for example, the assessed value and/or the $480,000 that I had presented 2 weeks ago as kind of a figure that could make us whole, or but then, of course, with there being not a minimum bid required through this process, I think that gives the board the flexibility to make a decision, even if it isn't quite at that mark within this next month or the next round of advertisements.
I have one.
Commissioner Anderson.
So the motion was to reject the bid, but did we need to have either part of the motion or a separate motion to run bids one more time, or how do we handle that part of it?
I thought I heard him say that the recommendation was to reject the bid and put it back out for the
After
April
advertisement,
meeting.
is that-
Okay, I just didn't hear it. Thank you.
Thanks for that clarification.
That's one motion.
I guess my question would be do we need to put a minimum bid in there so we don't, I mean, that's just my question or is it better to leave it open and just see what happens?
Mr. Gear, do you have a?
Well, there's not a requirement for a minimum bid, so I guess I like the flexibility that gives the board to make a decision to, instead of being just short and then here we are sitting on it yet. So I think it gives the board room to negotiate.
Administrator,
Yeah, Commissioner
Baker.
Anderson, I think that was a really good point, and Gary and I have talked in length about that these last couple of weeks, and we feel that maybe pigeonholes the board on what we're gonna do and what the capacity of this building could be. So in our recommendation, we would not put a minimum
Okay.
bid on there.
Any other questions?
Yes, question. So immediately, we're going to repost it then? Is that it?
Correct, yes, it will be, if I get it to the paper by noon tomorrow, then it will be the 25th, 1st, and the 8th is the 3 advertisements. And then the 18th, April 18th would be the bid opening before the board again.
All right, so we have a motion on the floor with a second to reject the bids and put it back out for new bids. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Gary. Tom?
Mr. Chair, members of the board, I'm Tom Odens, Chief Deputy Auditor Treasurer, Kennewick County. 2 items here. The first one would be requesting a forfeited land sale from a forfeited tax properties. I'd request that we have this sale on April 20th at 9 o'clock at 400 Bentz Avenue Southwest in Wilmer downstairs, which is the basement of the county office building downtown. Along with that packet are the list of lands that would be sold. We'll be approving those on the resolution next.
So at this point, we're just
Authorizing this.
authorizing the sale.
Yep, correct.
Okay. You heard the recommendation from Mr. Odens. How do you wish to proceed?
Mr. Chair, I make a motion that we put these up for sale and at the, however we got to word this, I'm not sure here. Request a forfeited land sale, I guess. So,
So we have a motion. Do I hear a second?
I'll second.
Any discussion?
So I'm going to ask the same question on these. Is there a minimum bid on these, or is this whatever it goes for is what it goes for?
Yes, Mr. Commissioner, the minimum bid would be on the table, the appraised value, that would be
Okay.
the minimum.
Okay.
Yeah, so, and then it'd be a live auction after that. So
Okay.
And how many parcels do we have this time?
There'd be 6 parcels this time. The January 3rd board meeting, there were 2 others. Atwater did buy one, and then there was another parcel of land in the city of Wilmer that was requested to be withheld from the sale by the HRA.
Yep.
So that'll be withheld for a minimum of 6 months.
Thank you. Commissioner
Yeah,
Gardner?
just for my own information, thank you, Mr. Chair, and for the audience as well. We had a map, I think, for some of these, right? Or do you have a map that you could share?
I do, yeah. Are you looking for a particular parcel?
Just an idea of where they're all located, I'd like to know.
Sure. So the very top one would be located in section 23 of Colfax Township. And that's just off of County Road 121. The next 2 are in Dovery Township, so that is just east of the golf course, kind of on Eagle Ridge Drive or 8th Street Northeast, kind of that little loop on just east of the golf course, Eagle Creek Golf Course. It's 2 residential lots. They're a little bit less, they're subpar. They're a little bit of lowland on them. The next one is just a lot in the city of Blumkist. No structures on it. And the last 2 are in the city of Wilmer, and actually they are the road access from 19th Avenue to Cub Foods, the actual road in front of Culver's there. And then also the land just to the west of that, which is also low, where in between where the old Office Max was and that road. So those are those bottom 2 pieces of land. So.
Thank you. I was wondering if in the future we could just have a township name on there, because
Sure.
Township 122 or rain doesn't mean a lot. We haven't learned how to read those. I haven't learned how to read those numbers. And for the public, some of these are very, very low numbers. And there's usually a reason for that. I remember having 2 parcels on the north shore of Nest Lake one time that literally were unbuildable parcels. They were a fraction of an acre, between the water and the road that just, they were unbuildable. And there was no reason anybody should buy them. And so they may stay in our hands. So,
And if these were to go no sale at the auction, they do go into inventory and they can be purchased at any time in our office. So if they don't sell now or on April 20th, they can be sold at a future date with no action from the board required, so.
oh, good point, good point. Commissioner, or I mean Administrator
That's
Baker.
good. And I think where, a little tidbit that you could do then when you're looking at the parcels is you use our GIS and all you have to do is put in that parcel number and then that address will show up.
Yeah, and I know we can go to it, but when we're just looking at the sheet,
Yeah.
you know,
But we can provide a map.
because, you know, if it's Fallen Township, you know, I wouldn't be familiar with it, even if it was, you know, on the GSS. All right,
Mr. Chair?
go ahead.
And thank you, Kelsey, for that reminder. I keep forgetting to do that. That'd be a good option for me to do. But also just kind of follow up on the two, in the second edition of Schmidt Outlot A and B. None of the businesses up to this point, and there's some businesses next to that, and it's a right-of-way, right? So when somebody buys that, they're responsible for a right-of-way then?
You know, when we sell these, we don't do, that'd be up to the future owner. We are just selling the state's interest in the property. We don't do, at the county, we don't do any of the research on the properties.
At all.
I did list the appraised, or the amount eligible for reassessment, because the city of Wilmer did send notice for those two, that they're, for the work that was done on 19th Avenue to assess those properties. So the city does reserve the right to add those assessments back on after the sale of forfeited lands.
So I have a question on those particular ones at the bottom, the outlot on Schmidt. Let's say, for example, Culvers would buy that property. Could they then shut that road off so that people wouldn't have access to Cub Foods?
You know, that is
Or
a
the other
good
way
question,
around.
because that is just something, we're just selling the state's interest, so we're just kind of acting as the holder now to facilitate these sales. But that would be a privately owned road then.
Because I know questions have come up in the past about the maintenance on that road.
Yes.
And somebody did a little improvement to it, like last year or the year before, but
And that is the reason for the 95-705 2020 is at $1,400, because the city of Wilmer did go in and fix some potholes or do some patchwork in there, and then they did invoice us for that, so we are recouping our costs that we paid out of the tax forfeited fund on that piece of land. So that is reflected in the minimum bid to make the county whole.
And similar question to what Commissioner Dale Anderson asked earlier, is that because of those easements and assessments, if they don't sell, then what?
It would sit in inventory in the state of Minnesota's name, care of us.
And then any maintenance on that is the responsibility of whom?
Us, Candiac County.
And can we bill the state then for that maintenance?
Unfortunately, no, we can't. No, we are the caretakers, if you will, at the local level. So, So we're hoping that somebody would buy these, purchase them, and then do the maintenance for it. So,
Do we ever enter into a negotiation with a prospective buyer to perhaps have a memo of understanding as to the maintenance and ownership and the easements on those?
You want me to? You could potentially do that, depending on if anything sells or not. I think after April 20th, if nothing moves, then I think the county can go into, maybe it's not a memo of understanding, but more of an agreement between the state and the county to care of this piece of property. Because if that road is tough and we're the caretaker of it, we would have to do something. So that could be potentially a discussion in the future.
Because it would almost seem as if, maybe I'm getting on a rabbit hole here a little bit, but, if it doesn't sell and the county ends up owing it, we could shut it off to Cub. And now all of a sudden Cub is very interested in owning that land.
As well as
Commissioner Gardner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Tom, I believe one of those parcels, Cub Foods, has their sign on it. And do I remember correctly that that access road was privately owned by the adjoining property owner to the east?
It was the developer at the time. It wasn't private ownership. Since then, the assessor's office has taken the value down to zero, so it wouldn't even be a tax statement generated anymore unless there's assessments added on it. Because no other roads in the city of Willmar are being valued, just because this one's private, they're treating it the same as other roads now. But the Cub Food sign does sit on the very bottom property, so there is an interest there.
Sure. So there'd be an interest there, and I think the road itself, there was a responsibility for maintenance of that by the property owner at one time, and does it seem to you that they want to abdicate that responsibility and hope that we're kind of stuck with it, to Roger's point?
Yeah, and I think that there was just no maintenance done for many years, and I think that's why it's also becoming an issue and concern that the city went in and patched it. I'm sure that the phone calls were going directed to the city. I don't know if the Public Works Department at all got involved on that or not, but
I was called a couple times, but I know the city guys yet.
Commissioner Berg.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, thank you. Yes, and also there's that business on the corner that's for sale or is sold or in the process or whatever. I'm really surprised that they wouldn't be interested, since it butts up to them in that property as well. And that there was potentially maybe some discussion about that, I don't know.
so along with this sale,
I'm going down that rabbit hole now.
in the meantime, we will be sending letters and notices to all adjoining properties. So they will all be notified of this auction sale coming up, so they will be aware of. And we'll also have this published on our website. We'll post it in the Lakes Area Review for 2 consecutive weeks, at least 10 days prior to the sale. So we'll have it published, posted, and letters sent out to adjoining property owners.
Roger.
Very good. Commissioner Dale Anderson.
I guess something that just popped in my head, and it might pertain to all the situations, but I guess the one up in Colfax Township. So is the person, is it a as-is sale? I mean, there's buildings and garbage and stuff up on that land yet, so it's, you're buying it as is, what you get for all the different sets, I guess?
Yeah, it's all as it, yeah, buyer beware, buying it as is. Yep. The family does have the right to come in within a reasonable amount of time to get any personal property left over. If there are vehicles involved, we would, similar to the sheriff's office would do it, similar to like a sale of vehicles, things like that, but otherwise it's buyer as is. Yep.
Any other questions or comments? Then have we voted on this?
Nope.
We do have the motion, so. So all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Both same sign. Motion carries. Thank you for answering all those questions.
So the second part of this would be Resolution 2023-12, which is the actual list of lands to be sold, which we've referenced already, as well as fixing the terms of sale, which is required to have a resolution. So the list, as we have just talked about, and then also the terms of sale, it can be purchased for cash, or if it's over $300, we can do it on contract for deed. And that interest rate is set by the state of Minnesota. This year is 10% would be the contract price, or the percentage on the contract. Also, we have included the other fees that would be required to be paid upon purchase, the 3% assurance tax, the state deed tax, the state deed prep fee, as well as the recording fee to put it in the new buyer's name from the state.
So let me see if I understood the 10% part. Is that 10% down payment or 10% interest rate?
The interest, it'd be a 20% down payment minimum, and then it'd be a 10% interest rate, 4 equal installments after that.
All right, so you've heard, we have resolution 2023-12 on the table. Do I hear a recommendation or a motion approving that?
Mr. Chair, I also move
Commissioner Berg moves on resolution
resolution
2023-12. Do I hear a second?
I'll second it.
Commissioner Dale Anderson seconds. Any more discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Thank you very much. Mr. Van Dyken. Sorry to keep you waiting.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Eric Van Dyken here before you with three recommendations from the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission met on March 13th, that's last Monday evening, and considered three separate requests for conditional use permits. The first is a request from Green Garden LLC or Nokomis Energy for a 1 megawatt solar facility, community solar garden in the far southwest corner of the county, just west of Princeburg along Highway 7 on the north side, right along near the county line. It's kind of mirrored right across the county line in Chippewa County by another 1 megawatt facility. These are becoming somewhat common on the Highway 7 XL Energy corridor there. The Planning Commission did unanimously recommend approval with 2 attached conditions and the findings as you see in the minutes.
So you heard the presentation from Mr. Van Dyken. How do you wish to proceed?
Mr. Chair, I would move the recommendation of the Planning Commission with the conditions and findings.
Commissioner Gardner moves on the recommendation of the solar array. Do I hear a second?
I'll second that.
Commissioner Dwayne Anderson seconds. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you. The second request is a request of Crow River Construction for a automobile sales in a commercial industrial district. This is at their corporate headquarters, just north of New London, near Christie's Auto. And really, the essence of it is that they need a dealer license. And of course, the state sends out a form that verifies zoning authorization. That does require a CUP. They typically are actually going to be buying vehicles for their own operation, not necessarily for sales, although you might have 1 or 2 occasionally for sales. So the Planning Commission does unanimously recommend approval here with 3 attached conditions and the findings as you see present.
You heard Mr. Van Dyken on the request to approve this permit. How do you wish to proceed?
Mr. Chair, I will move the recommendation of the Planning Commission along with the conditions and findings.
Commissioner Gardner moves on the request. Do I hear a second?
Mr. Chair, I'll second that motion.
Commissioner Berg seconds. Any questions or comments? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thirdly and finally then is another request from Crow River Construction. This is for a mining operation on approximately 17 acres of land. This will be just south of what we would maybe call the Belgrade Beet Piler, owned by the Southern Minnesota Beet Sugar Cooperative. Maybe I can give you just a little bit of background there. When the beet co-op developed that site, a contractor came in, stripped off all the topsoil, placed it in a large pile nearby, didn't actually end up getting it repositioned, and it sits there. And as such, the beet co-op has to continue a lease on that property from Mr. Howard, the landowner. And they'd like to get out of that lease. And so they approached Crow River, and Crow River said, well, why don't we take some good quality material out of there, restore the grade using that topsoil, and then all parties win. Crow River gets some material, the Howards get some royalties on the gravel, and they get their land back, and Beet Sugar Co-op is released from their further obligation for the land. So this will be a fairly short-term operation. The applicants had proposed 3 years, and the Planning Commission proposed to give a little bit broader window so we don't bump against that too fast at about 5 years. You'll see a fairly standard set of conditions there in items 1 through 10 and findings. And with those findings and conditions, the Planning Commission does recommend approval.
You heard the presentation from Mr. Van Dyken. How do you wish to proceed?
Can I ask a question, or should we wait till motion?
Let's do the motion first.
Okay, all right.
I'll make a motion with a question also.
So, and I assume citing the conditions and findings.
Yep, with the conditions and findings. Yep.
I'll second that.
So Commissioner Dale Anderson moves, Commissioner Dwayne Anderson seconds. Commissioner Dwayne Anderson, proceed with your question.
Yeah, so there's a pile there now, correct? And so they're gonna take that away, and then they're gonna do some mining of gravel in addition, or?
That's correct. So
Okay.
their mining will be going for rock material. That's becoming a fairly common thing.
Okay.
They are proposing to take material that's 3/8 and up. That's where the value is for them. And that would be brought off sites. There won't be crushing, washing, that sort of thing there. And that represents, I think he said, about 23% based on their borings of the soil that's there. So it won't result in a big pit by the time they're done. The topsoil that's there should mostly make up for. So it's going to be, the topography will generally be like the surrounding ag land, will be useful for ag purposes when they complete it.
So the pile that they're not really taking away the pile, they're just gonna put that in the spot where they mine.
That's correct.
Okay.
So as they start from the front and move to the back, as they reclaim in the front, they'll bring topsoil around and then respread the sand that they don't use, put that topsoil on and do that from the front all the way to the back.
Okay.
So it should be a good improvement and I think just a real benefit all the way around to each party.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Dale Anderson.
So my question is, I had a couple people ask me, is there a bottom limit for how deep they can go? Because the concern that I've had brought up to me is if they drop down into that water table and it fills up like the quarry did on 71, where now it's a lake, that was their concern. So I just was wondering if there was a bottom limit that we set for how deep they can mine that?
That was not made explicit, but they are held to what their proposal is. Their proposal is to not mine into the water table, and so they would be held to that.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments? Hearing none, you heard the recommendation from Planning and Zoning. How do you wish to proceed? Oh, we already have that. I'm sorry. Yes. So all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Pose same sign. Motion carries.
Thank you.
Thanks, Eric. All right, we are at the end of our regular agenda. And so we'll do an administrative update and then board report outs.
Okay.
Administrator Baker.
Yeah, so what I would ask for is, like it says on the agenda, the creation of a policy committee. I've brought this up at the department head meeting. I've talked to the county attorney, talked to some department heads, and Chair Imdike, that a lot of our policies they haven't been approved since 2010, 2012. And so I think this creation of this committee would just be a good review, that we would meet quarterly. We would have, I would ask that one commissioner, maybe the chair, would sit on it for this year. And then I've asked the county attorney, public works director, health and human services director, Jenny Lippert, Connie Mort, HR director. And then we'd kind of make sure we have all departments involved. And then we would meet quarterly to review the employee handbook, social media policy, the financial policies, acceptable use, et cetera. And so we would just review these on an annual basis. If there are any major changes, obviously they would be brought to the board for full approval, but just being reviewed more on an annual basis. And right now, we don't really have a numbering system for our policies countywide. So it would just be that, like it says, the creation of a true policy committee, that we would be reviewing everything on an annual basis.
So, Administrator Baker, as you see this, we have a document in place that hasn't been reviewed probably for some time. And so the first task would be to take a look at it. Should we form this policy? And that's not an action item today, correct?
No, it's not an action item, more or less. It's just letting you know that we're creating an internal committee,
Okay.
that we would ask one commissioner to sit in on.
And so once that policy is reviewed and changes are proposed, then you would come in front of the board for approval of,
Yep,
of the policy.
yep.
And would we be doing that in, say, segments? Because you got different kinds of policies, some is behavioral policy, some is financial policy, some are costs and travel, those kind of things. Is that how you see that?
Yeah, so I see it as, some might have to be reviewed in the middle of the year so that they can be approved by the first of the year, say for any travel mileage, things like that that we're putting into policy. In our employee handbook, we have a lot of, if it has to do with anything like the travel or mileage, we do refer back to statute. So we're meeting statutory needs there. But things would have to be reviewed more on a quarterly basis. Once there's major changes, then it would be brought to the board. So I would say maybe twice a year, policies would be brought to the board for final approval.
Go ahead, Commissioner.
A question to you as the chair. Are you comfortable doing this? And I think it's a good idea. Move forward.
Well, yeah, I think all of those things should be reviewed periodically because things change. An example, and this one is guided by statute, I understand that, is a reimbursable mileage. The price of gas goes up and down, you have costs. But I was also reminded recently when I turned in an expense report for meals. I mean, you can't go to McDonald's anymore for $15, and I think our limit was $12 or something like that. So these things need to be periodically reviewed and updated for the times. So, did that answer your question? Or-
Yes.
Yeah.
It sounds like you're okay to be on that committee.
Oh, I'm fine with serving, but if somebody else has a really strong desire to do so, I would, Dwayne's laughing. I think that many didn't want to do it.
I don't think there is.
You know what, and if I can say, Mr. Chair, a lot of times too, after we get an audit, we're working with a new audit firm this year, Clifton Larson Allen. So sometimes when you get your audit report back, there might be something that you'll have to include in your financial policies because it was a finding
Okay.
in, our audit report. And so that would be something that we would put in our financial policy. So I think it's really good for an organization this size to be reviewing those policies so that we are up to speed. Even just our remote work policy that we've had now a couple of years, it's good to revisit that and make sure that we're meeting the employees' needs as well.
Yes, I agree.
I mean, I think it's maybe something, I understand it's been 10 years, 12 years for some of these, but maybe it's something that we just need to do ongoing and do a certain number of them every year. And then it kind of gets to be a rotation instead of it getting to be this big gap where it doesn't get reviewed. And
Absolutely, that's the goal. That's the
Okay.
purpose of this, is to review our policies on an annual basis, make sure they're not out to date, make sure, for instance, that's why I've asked our county attorney to set that we're meeting all statutory needs. We're not missing anything, that maybe, the sick leave change, the sick leave statute has changed, so we're making sure that's updated, things like that. And so that would be the goal of it.
Any other comments or questions? All right, did you have any other updates you wanted to bring before us,
No.
Administrator? So then we'll do report outs, and I know it's been a little bit of a while, and I'll just remind you that we're going to try to focus on quality rather than quantity of the meetings that we've gone to, and things that are important that all of us should know based on the committees that you attended. So, Commissioner Gardner, are you ready to?
I certainly can be. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just getting back into the swing of this, had an opportunity to meet with our legislators, Representative Baker and Senator Lang recently. And then during I walked with Representative Baker on his way out the door after the township meeting, after his session at the township meeting yesterday, and visited with him about a specific House file, number 1419, which might have some good implications for the county and our largest city in terms of housing. And that was actually mentioned in our AMC update yesterday, and I encourage all of you to take a look at that. Recently was elected alternate from the Southwest region to the State Community Health Services Advisory Committee's Executive Committee. And finally, I want to mention being caught with my phone ringing a couple of times recently, that March is Food Share Month. And so the fines that I'm incurring are going to the Wilmer Area Food Shelf. And I would just encourage everybody else out there, as well as everybody in this room today, to contribute generously. They can do mostly with cash. That's where they get their biggest bang for the buck. And from what we've heard from Ms. Lippert recently regarding the winding down of the additional food assistance, SNAP assistance, the food shelves are going to get hammered. And the need is really going to explode out there. So if we can please give generously, that would go a long ways towards helping folks out. And I think that's all I've got for you today.
So I would take a moment here to just kind of clarify and illuminate those, maybe even Administrator Baker, what he was referring to as a fine. In my first term as board chair, I made a largely unenforceable decree that if your phone rings during a meeting or pings during a meeting, that you make a donation to the food shelf or a organization of your choosing. Probably largely unenforceable. I appreciate you stepping up and admitting. I didn't hear it ring, by the way. But you're right. They could really use it. And March is Food Shelf Month. I know the link is also putting out a lot of appeals right now. So thank you. We'll just go down the line if you're ready.
Okay.
Commissioner.
Yep. So I'll just make a comment about that. With the food shelf or whatever, I'm on the UCAP board, and if you give them a donation, they can really stretch those dollars. They have ways of, I don't know, they've explained it to me, but I can't remember exactly how they do it. But if, say you gave $100, I think they can stretch it out to several times that. So anyway, so that's just another side comment, and they really do a good job on dealing with people that have needs like that. In the last couple of weeks, I had one important meeting I thought was interesting meeting. It was Central Minnesota Jobs and Training, and that was up in Monticello. At that meeting, it was my first meeting, and I'm sitting there talking to different commissioners, and I'm asking them, well, so what's going on here? What are we supposed to do? And they're like, I don't know, and I don't know. And here we found out, it was brought up by the gal that runs it, Victoria Hosh is one, and anyway, they said this is the first time they remember this happening, but out of 11 different commissioners on this committee, there's 8 new ones. So it was
like
quite a
legislature.
significant change. Anyway, so we have a lot of learning on that committee, and as a result, they want us to go to. There's a state meeting up in Duluth this summer. They really are encouraging us to go so that we can kind of get up to speed on what all takes place with this here committee, and then also they really want us to go to Washington D.C. They're going to ask the counties to do, to pay for that. And I said, well, I would like to go, but I said, I'm not going to ask the county. So if they have it in their budget, I said I would go, but I'm not going to ask the county to send me to Washington, D.C. But anyway, so that was that meeting. The ones that I had last week, they pretty much got canceled because of the snow conditions. So that's it for me.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Commissioner Bird?
Yes, I'll go next. Thank you. First off, normally I don't do anything like this, but I'd like to give a shout out to Beth Nelson. And she works with Blue Cross Blue Shield, and she's worked there over 25 plus years. And she's served Canuet County all those years. And she represented Blue Cross Blue Shield, and not only did she take worked with us really well from that point of view, but she's been a real advocate for our citizens, trying to get the services as much as possible. Anyway, she's retiring this week, and I just like to give her a shout out and thank her for all her years of service, working with the people in Candy County and our staff here, as well as wishing her the best in retirement. I had several meetings, and the weather has been pretty lousy, and I think several of the other commissioners, we've all been to similar meetings. The EDC meeting, we had the township meeting, so I won't go into any details. We had the PAC for Families annual meeting since our last meeting, and that was downstairs and was well attended, and I'm the current chair of that, and the new director of the program, Sarah Vonderhaar, was there, and we're very lucky to have her on board, and looking forward to a good year with PAC4. Also on Woodland Centers, I'm on the board for Woodland Centers, and I attended this is a new committee for me, my first program committee meeting there, and we reviewed detox and the detox program and the history of it and detox services in the state. It was very interesting, and we're looking into that program. And we're going to have a follow-up meeting, and I'll have more information a couple months from now. It's a quarterly type of committee. And also, I would just like to give an update that on the Southern Prairie Community Care Program, it is actually, there's a meeting coming up this Friday, and it's going to actually close down. At least we're going to have a vote on that. So I will be there representing the board on that vote, and they need a 100% vote to officially close it down. We all know this has been coming. We've discussed this before, moving forward on that. As part of that, they have actually, in the closing down the process, we discussed previously about using some of those dollars to buy into Prime West. And we have received this past couple weeks, Candy County's share of the dollars of the resources left from there, and the intent is to use those for Prime West, and we will be forwarding those dollars. And that came to $704,387. So that's really going to knock down the county's commitment to Prime West of our general fund. So our general fund commitment is going to be very small. This meeting on Friday, we're going to be discussing that there's still some dollars left over and dividing those up. And there's a plan, but we still have to have a formal process on that. There will not be that much money left over dividing out, but it will still be, I think, a significant amount of dollars that it will even further lessen the county's buy-in. And so the Prime West thing is really working out very positively, far from the close to $3 million we originally talked about. Very, very different from that. And I guess I won't go into any more detail because I just wanted to highlight some of the real important things.
Thank you, Commissioner Byrd. Commissioner Dale Anderson.
Kind of the same thing. I've had a lot of meetings the last couple of weeks. The one big thing that I guess was my highlight since our last meeting was I got to spend time with Tammy Jo in the corrections part, kind of taking a tour of that and learning about it. I had no idea, and I still have no idea. But that was very interesting. She took me through and showed me and introduced me to the people in that department. And we had a long discussion, actually stayed here, I think, till 4:30 or 5 o'clock, talking about different things that are involved in that thing. So that was kind of my highlight of my meetings. The other thing that is something that you guys aren't all at is I had a Chippewa River Watershed Association meeting, and they're really moving ahead very fast on their one plan update. So they're actually ahead of schedule, and it's really going good. I had probably an hour-long discussion about that, and it's going to be up for review. Our next meeting, we're going to start reviewing it for the final part. The other kind of interesting thing, if anybody's interested, they're going to do a pollinator, popcorn, and pints thing at the winery south of Glenwood on April 3rd, I think it is. Just an informational thing to let people know what programs and stuff that there is available through Soil and Water and through the watershed. So that was an interesting meeting. Yesterday was kind of a crazy day of meetings, but I actually went up to the Glacial Trails meeting up in Alec, They have a brand-new park there, and I can't remember the name of it, sorry, but it's just north of Alec, and that was all done with legacy funds. That whole park was built with legacy funds, and it was beautiful. It was a beautiful facility there that they had. And the biggest thing that we talked about there is if anybody's driving down the Glacial Ridge Trail, just take time to look for signs, because there's supposed to be a sign telling you that it turns, and then a confirmation sign once you turn. So if anybody sees them missing, let me know or something so that they can get them signs put back up, because they do lose them or they get knocked down. And the concern is that people get lost when they're trying to actually drive on the Glacial Ridge Trail. That's probably the biggest thing. I was at the Historical Society meeting, and they're going to have their annual meeting coming up too, but not a huge amount of information from that. So I guess that's probably my highlights.
Thank you. I got a question. When you say the signs, you're talking about the scenic byway signs.
Yep, the scenic byway signs, yep.
Yeah. I'm a little envious of that committee because out at Three Sisters, there's one right outside our window for that sign. And I get a lot of people asking me about that scenic byway, and I make a lot of recommendations, especially in fall.
Yeah.
To drive that tour. 104 clearly is one of the prettier drives around here. And also on your pollinator thing, it made me think of our bike and pedestrian update plan. Mel, do you want to talk a little bit about, as we're trying to do the update to that plan, and you got some open houses and stuff.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, we're doing an update for the bike and trail plan. It's been 5 years since we created it, and we're going to do an open house, quasi-open house booth at the Holman, I want to say Holman Garden, but it's Outdoor Living Expo on March 31. We will have staff at the booth, and then on Saturday for a couple hours, we might have a Mid-Minnesota reps there. And then we're looking at the following week doing one in New London, but nothing's confirmed yet on that. So March 31, Friday afternoon, or Friday starting at like 4 o'clock, 3 o'clock till 7 o'clock. And then on Saturday, I believe till 4.
It seems like we had a goal of getting how many surveys?
500 was our goal, and we were at 396 the other day. I mean, like last Thursday or Friday. So we should easily surpass that with this.
Open house.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right, so like you, I've been to meetings that we've all been, the Township Association and,
EDC.
yes. But I think I don't know if I'll call it a highlight, but we had a meeting with Administrator Baker and Commissioner Gardner. Mel was there. Who else was there with Senator Lang? And very much appreciated that. It was much more productive being able to sit down with the senator and tell him what our concerns and needs are, as opposed to people, when you go to our legislative day at the Capitol, they're just hearing from a lot of people over and over. But we got to focus in on our needs in the county, and I think it was really helpful. And then later in the week or the next week, Commissioner Gardner and I, Administrator Baker was stranded at home due to icy roads, but we were able to meet with Representative Baker. And we always assume that they know what's going on in the county. But like us a little bit, they're looking at it from a very high level, and they don't always get into the detail. And so this gives us an opportunity to kind of get into the detail. I think in the case of Representative Baker, he knows county program aid is an important thing. He just didn't realize how important it is to the property tax levy, or the levy that we have to impose because we aren't getting the county program aid. So these are helpful meetings, and I appreciated both of them taking the time to visit with us. And with that, unless anybody else says anything else, we will adjourn.